Benvenuti alle conversazioni e bentornati a Writers on Writers. Gli ospiti di questa settimana sono John Landis, che ha scelto un brano di Dave Eggers, Isabel Fonseca, che ha scelto un brano di Nabokov, e infine Jeffrey Eugenides, che ha scelto una poesia di Matthew Arnold. Concluderò la puntata con una lettura, ho scelto il poeta polacco Zbigniew Herbert.
Hello, I'm John Landis, and I will be reading a short story from this anthology called Shadow Show, which was edited by Sam Weller and Mort Castle, published in 2012. It's all new stories in celebration of Ray Bradbury. I'm going to read a short story by Dave Eggers. Dave Eggers wrote a heartbreaking work of staggering genius, among other books, and this is his tribute to my friend Ray. This actually is an afterword, but I'm going to read it first. This is a little piece by Dave Eggers explaining why he's part of this anthology. I was introduced to Ray Bradbury in grade school when we read A Sound of Thunder, and the experience was powerful, knowing that he'd grown up in Waukegan, a few towns from where I was raised. And every year or so thereafter, we were assigned one or another Bradbury text. And always I was floored by his boundless imagination. I have to admit, though, that I hadn't read him in many years until a few years ago, when I picked up an old edition of an anthology edited by Alfred Hitchcock called Stories Not for the Nervous. In it was a Bradbury story about time travel, crime, marriage, and film, all set in the 1930s in Mexico. A lot to cover in a 10-page story, but Bradbury pulled it off brilliantly, and my respect for his body of work, the breadth and scope of which is stunning, was renewed. Dave Eggers. And now, this is his short story in tribute to my friend Ray, who was such a sweet and gentle man. It's odd how dark most of his stories are. Who Knocks by Dave Eggers. When I was a kid in the suburbs of Chicago, during the summer, we'd go to Cutico Provincial Park, up on the border of Minnesota and Canada. Provincial implies that the place was small, but Cutico was, and still is, a 1 million-acre nature preserve, so big you could go for days and days without seeing another soul. We would go on camping trips up there, weeks of canoeing and portaging, spotting bears and moose and deer, sleeping under star-soaked skies. The park was isolated and so pristine that you could actually drink the water straight from the lakes. You'd stick your paddle in, tilt the wide part into the clouds, and let the water run into your mouth. I miss Cutico, but I won't be going back anytime soon, not after what happened to a girl named Frances Brandywine. This was a few years ago. Frances was 17 at the time, black-haired and with a reckless nature, determined always to leave the well-trod path, to break new ground and go alone. Frances was up in Cutico with her family in a remote part of the park, camped on the shore of one of the deeper lakes. A lonely body of dark water carved millions of years ago by a passing glacier. One night, after her family went to bed, Frances took the rowboat out, planning to find a quiet spot in the middle of the lake, lie on the bench of the boat, look up at the sky, and maybe write into her journal. So she left the shore and rowed for about 20 minutes, and when she was satisfied that she was over the lake's deepest spot, she lay down and looked up at the night sky. The stars were very bright, the aurora borealis shimmering like a neon lasso. She was feeling very peaceful. Then she heard something strange. It was like a knock. Clop, clop. She sat up, guessing that the boat had drifted to shore and run aground. But she looked around the boat, and she was still a half mile from shore. She leaned over the side, to see if she'd hit anything, but she saw nothing, no log, no rocks. She lay back down, telling herself that it could have been any number of things: a fish, a turtle, a stick that had drifted under the boat. She relaxed again and soon fell into a contented reverie. She had just closed her eyes when she heard another knock. This time it was louder, a crisp cluck, 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 like the sound of someone knocking hard on a wooden door, except this knocking was coming from the bottom of the boat. Now she was scared. She leaned over the side again. It had to be an animal, but what kind of animal would knock like that? 3 short, loud knocks in rapid succession? Her mouth went dry. She held on to each side of the boat, and now she could only wait to see if it happened again. The silence stretched out. A few minutes passed, and just as she began to think she'd imagined it all, the knocks came again. But this time loud. Bam, bam, bam! She had to leave. She lunged for the oars, got them in place, and began rowing. The water was very calm, so she should have made quick progress. But after rowing feverishly for minutes, she looked around and realized with cold dread that she wasn't moving at all. Something was keeping her exactly where she was. Her mind clawed through options. She thought about leaving the boat and swimming to shore, but she knew the water was so cold that she'd freeze before she got very far. And besides, whatever was knocking on the bottom of the boat was in that water. Again, she tried rowing. She rowed and rowed on the verge of tears, but she went nowhere. She stopped. She was exhausted. Her heavy breathing filled the air. She cried. She sobbed. But soon she calmed herself, and the boat was silent again. For 10 minutes, then 20. Again, she tricked herself into thinking she'd imagined all of it. But just like before, just when she was beginning to get a grip on herself, the knocking came again, this time as loud as a bass drum. Boom, boom, boom! The floorboards of the boat shook with each strike. Now she made a bad decision. She decided to lower one of the oars into the black water, trying to feel if there was some land mass, maybe even some creature she could touch. She felt a strong, silent tug on the other end of the oar, and it was pulled under. She screamed and jumped back. Now she had no options. All she could do was sit and hope and wait, waiting for the morning to come. Wait for whatever was going to happen to happen. The knocking went on through the night. Sometimes it was sudden and loud, bam, 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 and sometimes quieter, tap, tap, tap. Every so often it was almost musical, knock, knock, knocka. She passed the time writing in her notebook, recording each sound, each strike, and it's only because of this notebook that we know what happened that night. Frances can't tell us. She was never seen again. The boat was found on shore the next day, empty but for the journal. On those pages were her frantic jottings, all written in her distinctive hand. All but the last page. When it was found, the page was still wet, and on it were 4 words, looking as they'd been written quickly with a muddy finger. Perhaps in justification, they said, "I did knock first."
I'm Isabel Fonseca, and I'm going to read Vladimir Nabokov's Transparent Things from the end. Hugh Person is our hero. Coughing, our person sat up in asphyxiating darkness and groped for the light. Now flames were mounting the stairs in pairs, in trios, in redskin file, hand in hand, tongue after tongue, conversing and humming happily. It was not, though, the heat of the flicker, but the acrid dark smoke that caused person to retreat back into the room. "Excuse me," said a polite flamelet, holding open the door he was vainly trying to close. The window banged with such force that its panes broke into a torrent of rubies, and he realized, before choking to death, that a storm outside was aiding the inside fire. At last, suffocation made him try to get out by climbing out and down, and there were no ledges or balconies on that side of the roaring house. As he reached the window, a long, lavender-tipped flame danced up to stop him with a graceful gesture of its gloved hand. Crumbling partitions of plaster and wood allowed human cries to reach him, and one of his last wrong ideas was that those were the shouts of people anxious to help him, and not the howls of fellow men.
The sea is calm tonight, the tide is full. The moon lies fair upon the straits. On the French coast the light gleams and is gone. The cliffs of England stand glimmering and vast out in the tranquil bay. Come to the window. Sweet is the night air. Only from the long line of spray where the sea meets the moon-blanched land, listen. You hear the grating roar of pebbles which the waves draw back and fling at their return up the high strand, begin and cease, and then again begin, with tremulous cadence slow, and bring the eternal note of sadness in. Sophocles long ago heard it on the Aegean, and it brought into his mind the turbid ebb and flow of human misery. We find also in the sound a thought, hearing it by this distant northern sea. The sea of faith was once too at the full, and round earth's shore lay like the folds of a bright girdle furled. But now I only hear its melancholy, slow withdrawing roar, retreating with the breath of the night wind down the vast edges drear and naked shingles of the world. Ah, love, let us be true to one another. For the world which seems to lie before us like a land of dreams, so beautiful, so various, so new, hath really neither light, nor love, nor joy, nor certitude, nor peace, nor help for pain. And we are here as on a darkling plain, confused with alarms of struggle and flight, where ignorant armies clash by night.
Come anticipato, leggerò alcuni versi di Zbigniew Herbert. E allora è lecito usare in poesia nomi di pastori greci, tentare di fissare i colori di un cielo mattutino, scrivere d'amore e anche una volta ancora, con serietà mortale, offrire al mondo tradito una rosa. Buona lettura e ci vediamo la settimana prossima.